If you ask President Trump, all he does is win. But his DOJ, not so much. It turns out that when you lay off the competent career staff and then fire all the ethical attorneys who refuse to do manifestly illegal and unethical stuff, you're not left with the best and brightest. And Trump's DOJ keeps stepping on rakes. Well, it's more like they step on a banana peel and then rakes, and then banana peels and rakes at the same time. Never has a topic been more appropriate for Liz Dye, our resident chaos lawyer.
Thanks, Devin. Attorney General Pam Bondi was sworn in on February 5th. And, well, we're not saying it's been a shit show, but we're not saying it. Bondi's tenure as head of the Justice Department was marked by employee purges, a judicial contempt finding, missed deadlines, misfiled documents, and most of all, Fox News hits. Lots and lots of Fox hits.
DEA has seized over 21 million fentanyl pills. That's 21 million lives saved, in my opinion.
We are going to prosecute you, and we are prosecuting you.
And okay, it's not unheard of for the AG to speak to the press, but Attorney General Bondi seems to be a lot more focused on selling the Trump administration's priorities on television than getting the law right. Here she is announcing that the DOJ filed charges against New York Governor Kathy Hochul and State Attorney General Letitia James.
We have filed charges against Kathy Hochul. We have filed charges against Letitia James and Mark Schroeder.
She did not file charges against Hochul and James. She filed a civil complaint because New York refused to let the federal government go trawling through its driver's license database in search of undocumented immigrants. That complaint makes the truly bizarre claim that the state of New York is actually discriminating against the federal government by refusing to hand over data on undocumented immigrants who get driver's licenses. That case has not yet been decided, but thanks to the 10th Amendment's anti-commandeering doctrine, the federal government cannot force states to expend resources to carry out federal law enforcement. That's why the Supreme Court put the kibosh on gun background checks when the Clinton administration ordered states to do them at point of sale. And okay, this Supreme Court has been pretty good at finding a way to give President Trump whatever he wants, but still, Bondi's announcement that she charged New York officials was utter nonsense, and that's not the only thing she's confused about. There's a lot. So maybe it's best to tackle this one regionally. Okay, since we're already in New York not charging the governor and the AG, let's talk about the criminal case against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Adams was indicted in September of 2024 and charged with bribery and wire fraud. The case was set to go to trial in April, but in February, the government moved to dismiss the case. The New York Times published internal communication showing Emile Beauvais, the number 3 guy at the Justice Department, ordering the acting U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Danielle Sassoon, to temporarily uncharge Adams so the administration could leverage the politician to enact their immigration agenda. Remember, feds can't force New York to do its bidding, but if the mayor is worried that if he doesn't give the president what he wants, he'll get reindicted, you can get around that pesky 10th Amendment problem. Sassoon resigned rather than carry out that corrupt order, and her deputy, Hagan Scotton, refused to sign it either, writing in a mic drop letter, "I expect you will eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion, but it was never going to be me." Beauvais, whose last gig was as Donald Trump's personal lawyer, reportedly locked a bunch of prosecutors in a room and threatened to fire them all if someone from SDNY didn't put their name on his facially corrupt dismissal motion. After a couple of hours, one of the more senior lawyers did it to spare his younger colleagues. But then the Trump administration trotted Adams out on Fox so that immigration czar Tom Homan could brag about the deal that would allow him to get up Adams' butt if he didn't cooperate on immigration, which did not make the thing reek less of corruption.
And we were able to get in the room and really articulate what are my powers, what are my authorities, and what are some of the things that we need to legislatively address that is preventing us from doing what we want to do.
Judge Dale Ho called it fundamentally incompatible with the basic premise of equal justice under the law to allow the government to threaten criminal prosecution as a means of controlling the leader of the biggest city in America. The judge dismissed the case against Adams with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. The whole thing was an absolute black eye for the Justice Department, which lost several highly experienced prosecutors, including 3 who published a joint letter in April refusing to confess wrongdoing when there was none as a condition of getting their jobs back. And the DOJ wasn't done shedding lawyers either. New York's Metropolitan Transit Authority is in a legal battle with the Trump administration over congestion pricing in Manhattan. Basically, it was a pilot program approved under President Biden, but 5 minutes after being sworn in, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy announced that he was terminating it. Then he headed over to Fox to explain that he was saving the world from the dangers of public transit.
If you want people to ride public transportation, Governor Hochul, then make public transportation beautiful. Make it safe. Felony crime on the subway is up 9% this year alone.
Duffy took it for granted that the Justice Department would back-formulate a rationale, and they have been doing their level best, but in an internal memo, they warned of considerable litigation risk because, one, the law is not on the government's side, and two, the plaintiffs here are likely to ask for and get internal Transportation Department communications and possibly a deposition of Secretary Duffy himself. Now, normally, we would never see a document like this because it is attorney-client privileged, but at 9 p.m. on April 11th, it appeared on the public docket. That was clearly an accident. The right document, which was another nasty letter from Duffy to Governor Hochul threatening to withhold all federal highway money, appeared moments later on the docket. And look, you can see how that kind of thing might happen. There have been mass layoffs, and the people left at DOJ are super overworked defending the administration in hundreds of lawsuits. But that did not stop Transportation Department spokeswoman Haley Dobbins attacking those lawyers publicly. She said, "Are SDNY lawyers on this case incompetent, or was this their attempt to resist? At the very least, it's legal malpractice. It's sad to see a premier legal organization continue to fall into such disgrace." And by the way, the Transportation Department said that it was sidelining the lawyers who drafted that memo to Duffy, but a month later, their names are still on court filings, maybe because there's no one left there to replace them with. Side note, Secretary Duffy got his start as a cast member on the 6th season of MTV's The Real World.
And all of a sudden I see Montana, looking at me like she's gonna unzip her vest and show me her boobies.
He later starred on Road Rules All-Stars, which is how he's qualified to be Transportation Secretary, obviously. Meanwhile, A.G. Bondi's media habits continue to be a problem for her department. In the Luigi Mangione case, she put out a statement on April 1 saying that she directed federal prosecutors to seek the death penalty and calling the killing an act of political violence because Mangione targeted a healthcare executive. At that point, Mangione hadn't even been indicted federally, although he was facing state charges in New York. Mangione's lawyers accused Bondi of deliberately tainting the jury pool and violating the Justice Department's own rules on how and when to seek the death penalty. TLDR, it involves a deliberative process in which they consider all mitigating factors, not a press release by the Attorney General before the defendant has even been charged. Mangione moved to take the death penalty off the table because of Bondi's big mouth. As of this recording, that issue is still being briefed. And before we leave New York, let's talk about one more case of what appears to be spectacular overreach by Emile Beauvais. The New York Times has a wild story about Beauvais ordering prosecutors to seek a warrant for the membership list of the pro-Palestinian student group Columbia University Apartheid Divest. He planned to give that membership list to ICE so that any immigrants exercising their First Amendment rights could be deported. But to get a warrant, you have to demonstrate probable cause that you'll discover evidence of a crime, and protesting is not it, which is probably why nobody from SDNY would put their name on this warrant application. Pro tip. Always look at the signature block on the filings. If the case is filed in, say, New York, and the only lawyers willing to sign their names to it are working out of Main Justice in D.C., it's probably a sign that whatever's in the document is hinky. So here's the signature page from the motion to dismiss the case against Eric Adams. See how it's signed by 2 lawyers from the criminal division and Beauvais himself, but no one from New York? That's weird. And it's one of the reasons Magistrate Judge Sarah Netburn rejected the warrant application for information on the Columbia student protest group. Beauvais then ordered the Justice Department to appeal to a U.S. District Court judge, which is, again, super weird. So then Judge John Keltel sent it back to the magistrate to reconsider, at which point Magistrate Netburn not only rejected the request for a search warrant, but she also ordered the government to abide by a special condition. Should prosecutors ever try to refile such an application before another federal judge, they had to include a transcript of the sealed discussions in her court. But Beauvais wasn't done. He ordered FBI agents to suit up in flak jackets and go stand near protesters in a phalanx formation in a clear attempt to intimidate those protesters. The New York Times notes that the FBI agents did not make any such show of force, maybe because they didn't want to wind up being deposed in a civil rights suit if things went sideways. But Beauvais looks like a paragon of competence compared to the guy they've got running the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. Oh, Ed Martin. There is a reason we made a video calling him Trump's worst lawyer. Okay, let's see how many Ed Martin scandals we can get into the next 90 seconds. Number one, he started his tenure by firing a bunch of seasoned prosecutors who worked on the January 6 cases and demoting others to misdemeanor intake, work so far below their pay grade that it was clear he hoped they'd quit. He also said he was launching an investigation of lawyers who worked on those cases. He followed that up by trying to launch a criminal investigation into recipients of congressionally allocated climate funds. First, he hounded a seasoned prosecutor into resigning because she refused to sign a warrant to seize the money from Citibank, because there was no probable cause to think that the grant recipients had committed a crime. Then he tried and failed to get that warrant himself. See, Emile Beauvais, it happens to lots of guys. Martin tried and failed to get someone at Maine Justice to bite on his big plan to indict Senator Chuck Schumer and Representative Brad Garcia for saying that Democrats ought to toughen up and fight, and for calling Elon Musk a dick. He called that operation Whirlwind. He also sent nasty letters to Georgetown University Law Center for teaching and promoting DEI, 4 medical periodicals, including the Journal of the American Medical Association, the New England Journal of Medicine, Obstetrics and Gynecology, and Chest, which is published by the American College of Chest Physicians, Wikipedia for abusing its nonprofit status and corrupting the AI by allowing it to scrape woke copy, medical marijuana vendors, people who publish the names of the Doge Bros currently tearing down the federal government. Shh, don't tell him those kids were on TV the other day. Has he threatened us yet? We should check that one after we go off the air. Phew, I think we made it. Hi, this is Liz from the future. Liz from the past is pretty sure that Ed Martin does not have the votes to get confirmed in the Senate by May 20th when his interim appointment runs out. What she does not know is that Trump will replace Martin with Fox News commentator Jeanine Pirro. She goes by Judge Jeanine, although she hasn't been a judge since the early 1990s. She did, however, work as a prosecutor in New York, although not in the last 20 years. But she is very tight with the entire Trump clan, and she does have some familiarity with civil litigation since the thing she said on air played a big role in the defamation litigation filed by both Fox and Smartmatic after the 2020 election. So good luck with that, America.
Now, if you ever find yourself needing a good lawyer, you probably don't want to talk to any of these people at the DOJ. But if you want a great lawyer, my law firm, the Eagle Team, can help. If you've gotten in a car crash, suffered a data breach, especially if you got a data breach letter saying your information might have been leaked, or dealing with a workers' comp or social security issue, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney. And by the way, we don't get paid unless you do, so there's nothing up front. So just click on the link in the description or call the phone number on screen for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle Team.
Also in D.C., the Justice Department has been trying without success to defend President Trump's attacks on major American law firms. Judge Beryl Howell was astonished at the quality of lawyering in that case, and not in a good way. During a hearing, she slammed Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Lawson for coming unprepared to answer questions about the deals struck by other law firms to get out from under Trump's sanctions. She said, not even knowing if they're written down is a pretty basic piece of information. And again, AG Pam Bondi's antics were not helping. When Judge Howell issued a temporary restraining order, she instructed the DOJ to issue written instructions to all the federal agencies telling them not to carry out Trump's attack on the law firm Perkins Coie. Bondi did do that in a memo accusing an unelected district court judge of invading the policymaking and free speech prerogatives of the executive branch and blatantly overstepping the judicial power. It's hard to convey how inappropriate that is from any officer of the court, much less the Attorney General of the United States. Howell herself called it a temper tantrum worthy of a 3-year-old. In that same case, the Justice Department demanded that Judge Howell recuse herself because she adjudicated several issues involving, quote, disgraced former prosecutor Jack Smith. The very first sentence of that recusal motion reads, fair proceedings free from any suggestion of impartiality are essential to the integrity of our country's judiciary. I think they mean partiality, not impartiality, because impartiality is the good one. Judge Howell denied the motion in a scathing order accusing the government of deploying the rhetorical strategy of ad hominem attack designed to impugn the integrity of the federal judicial system and blame any loss on the decision maker rather than fallacies in the substantive legal arguments presented. She said the department was spewing talking points more appropriate from a member of Congress than a legal brief from the United States Department of Justice. But it's the immigration cases where the Justice Department's total inability to litigate like like normal people has been most on display. On April 16th, Judge James Boasberg found probable cause to believe that the government committed criminal contempt of court. It is hard to convey just how weird that sentence is. Courts are usually totally deferential to the government, but during a hearing on March 15th, Judge Boasberg asked Assistant U.S. Attorney Drew Ensign directly if any planes full of prisoners being deported under the Alien Enemies Act were scheduled to take off or were already in the air. When Ensign could not answer, Judge Boasberg stopped the hearing and told him to go find out. He said, inform your clients of the order immediately and notify them that if class members were on a plane that is going to take off or is in the air, those people need to be returned to the United States. However that's accomplished, whether turning around a plane or not disembarking everyone on the plane, I leave to you. But this is something that you need to make sure is complied with immediately. Ensign said that he was unable to reach the Department of Homeland Security, and as a result, the plane that was already in the sky did not turn around. And in fact, 2 more planes took off after the court's order. Now, I'm not saying that the government is lying here, but that hearing was on a public line, and I know that because I was listening, and so was every other legal reporter in the country. So the claim that the government didn't know about that ruling in real time kind of seems like bullshit, which is why the government is going to find itself on the pointy end of a contempt ruling if it doesn't get bailed out by the D.C. Circuit or the Supreme Court. And as the Washington Post notes, Judge Boasberg is not the only judge appalled by the DOJ's shoddy work. In Virginia, Judge Leonie Brinkema called the evidence presented by ICE and the DOJ the sorriest statement I've ever seen and a terrible, terrible affidavit. She said, if this were before me in a criminal case, I'd throw you out of my chambers. I expect more from the government than this kind of very shoddy work. That was in the case of a couple whom the Justice Department accused of being high-ranking members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua based on more or less nothing, and arrested them 4 times in a row. So now 4 judges have ordered this couple released from ICE custody, with the last, Judge David Briones in Texas, making a judicial finding that these poor people are not gang members and ordering the DOJ to quit arresting them. He added that this court takes clear offense to respondents wasting judicial resources. The government's conduct in the case of Kilmar Albrego Garcia has been so outrageous that we made 2 videos about it already. But lest we forget, the original lawyer arguing in that case, Erez Ruveni, admitted in open court that the government deported that guy accidentally, and so did Robert Cerna, the ICE field office director, in an affidavit. But when the White House dug in and refused to bring him back, the Justice Department decided it would just unsay all that. So Ruveni was fired along with his supervisor, August Flencia. Pam Bondi said that Ruveni failed to zealously advocate on behalf of the United States, and any attorney who fails to live up to her standards will face consequences. So goodbye to another 2 DOJ lawyers with decades of experience. We could read judicial orders yelling at the Trump DOJ for another hour, but let's talk for a second about an issue that's not getting a lot of attention. In fact, the only way we know about it is from a series of TikToks by an attorney named Liz Oyer. Oyer was a former Justice Department lawyer who worked in the Office of Presidential Pardons. She says she was fired because she refused to recommend that Mel Gibson's gun rights be restored. The actor lost his right to own a gun in 2011 after pleading no contest to punching his girlfriend while she was holding their baby. But Gibson is a Trump supporter, and so the White House figured that was enough reason to make an exception to the law preventing domestic abusers from owning a firearm. When Oyer refused to write a memo endorsing it because the statutory guidelines do not extend to cases like Gibson's, she was fired. But don't worry, Attorney General Pam Bondi made it happen for Gibson anyway. Oyer was set to testify about all that before Congress when the Trump administration threatened to send federal marshals to remind her of her confidentiality obligations. Oyer testified anyway, and then she started making the TikToks about all the money we've lost in civil and criminal asset forfeitures thanks to Trump's dashed-off pardon.
Hey, everybody. You've asked for more information about the $1 billion worth of pardons granted by President Trump, and I am here to provide that. I'm Liz Oyer, former pardon attorney for the Department of Justice.
Because if you just pardon people who are nice to you or who donate money to your campaign, then it means the money they were supposed to pay in restitution doesn't get collected. So, for instance, convicted fraudster Trevor Milton donated $1.7 million to Trump's campaign in 2024. Prosecutors argued that he should pay $680 million in restitution to his victims, but thanks to a pardon from Trump in March, now he never will.
They say it was very unfair, and they say the thing that he did wrong was he was one of the first people that supported a gentleman named Donald Trump for president. He supported Trump. He liked Trump. I didn't know him, but he liked him.
Milton's lawyers on that case, by the way, were Michael Mukasey, who has also represented Trump, and Brad Bondi, the Attorney General's brother, the one who should very definitely not be head of the D.C. bar. But don't worry, AG Bondi has only been in office for 3 months. Pretty soon she'll hit her stride and it will all come together. Oh my God.
Yeah, I want to emphasize that last point. You might have seen I did an op-ed about why, if you're a member of the DC Bar, number one, you absolutely should vote in this year's election to the DC Bar, and number two, you should vote for anyone other than Brad Bondi for DC Bar president. And also, while you're at it, you should probably vote against Alicia Long for treasurer of the DC Bar. She's Ed Martin's second in command, which is all you need to know about how much she sucks and shouldn't be anywhere near the DC Bar. Frankly, shouldn't be anywhere near the DOJ. And speaking of which, it's particularly interesting to see how the media is covering Pam Bondi's DOJ. For example, when Bondi announced that the DOJ would shift its focus from protecting voter rights to preventing voter fraud, only 66 sources picked up that story, with about 60% coming from the center, a little over 30% coming from the left, and less than 10% coming from the right. And when you examine the headlines as a whole, you see a very important trend in journalism that you probably wouldn't have spotted if you only got news from a handful of outlets. We see that all 4 sources reporting from the right simply reposted this article from the Associated Press, but from the left and center they largely did the same thing. However, a handful of original articles also framed Bondi's announcement as something the DOJ's voting unit was told to do by Trump's order. Reposting articles from other outlets is nothing new, but it can have big effects on how bias spreads throughout the media. That's because the headlines you read first have immense power to shape how you understand the news, and that's why I like to see the news from as many angles as I can, which I do with the help of today's sponsor, Ground News. Because Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. And right now they're offering Legal Eaglets 40% off their unlimited access Vantage subscription. You can scan the QR code or use the link in the description to get a discount for a limited time. Because Ground News gathers related articles from around the world and across the political spectrum, so you can see the bias and compare coverage. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. One of my favorite parts is their bias comparison feature, which highlights specific differences in reporting across the political spectrum. This can be especially helpful when reading stories from sources you've never heard of, where there's no telling who owns it or what agenda they might have. I also love their blind spot feature, which shows you stories that are underreported by either side of the political spectrum, like this related story of Bondi's DOJ announcing the largest seizure of fentanyl in US history, which was largely ignored by the left, with less than 10% of sources reporting. This type of analysis helps explain why we often talk past each other, and why some people seem hyper-focused on what to others seems like nonsense or fake news. But all this is why Ground News is my favorite way to get the news. And as a Legal Eaglet, you can save 40% off the Ground News Vantage subscription by scanning the code that's on screen or clicking on the link down below. This subscription gives you unlimited access to every feature, including the Bias Insight tool and blind spot feed. And by subscribing, you'll support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent. So click on the link below and scan the code today. And after that, click on this link over here for more Legal Eagle, or I'll see you in court.